Hello and welcome back to Sean in the Shed. And on the show today, all the way from Dallas, we've got Jim Carlough, who's the author of The Six Pillars of Leadership. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Well, thank you for having me, Sean. I'm excited to be here.
So we always start off traditionally by talking about where you were born, your education, and how you started out in life. So perhaps you can share that with the audience.
Certainly. I'm not well, I don't have a cowboy hat on, so I'm not a Dallasite. I was actually born in Paterson, New Jersey, and was raised there and went to college in New Jersey, Seton Hall University. I have a degree in psychology. And once I got into the professional world, I'm going to kind of date myself here. In 1983, when I graduated college, I got into the insurance industry and worked for a number of years for insurance carriers before I transitioned into kind of insurance technology and the technology side of healthcare, where I've been my entire professional career. It's given me a great life. I've got a wife and three grown kids. All three kids are off the payroll. They're off the cell phone bill. They're off the insurance. So we did our job well.
And whilst you started out in Dallas, you did go to Connecticut for a period, met your wife, and then returned to Dallas. Talk us through that story and the boss that you had at the time and how he explained that venture.
So my boss here in Dallas at the time, I had just consolidated two lines of business into one office. And he said to me, he said, you know, you've never spent time in the home office. So I'm going to send you to Connecticut for a year. I want you to hide and I want you to learn. I don't want you to take jobs from anybody else up there. But don't worry, when I'm ready for you, you're coming back here. And I was like, okay. And so I went off to Connecticut. I didn't like the home office environment, but I did have fun. It just was Connecticut, being a Jersey boy, was a little bit different for me. And the only thing that came out of my stint in Connecticut was a blind date where I met my wife. And it turns out a gentleman that ran another department, he and I got along really well. And he had one of his employees come and ask if I was married or dating anyone. And I said, no, why? And they said, well, Dan has a sister-in-law and he'd like to fix you up with her. And I never did blind dates. So it was very interesting. So we eventually did this blind date, and it was on a Friday night. The bar is now a biker bar, but it wasn't at the time. And sat there with her and her sister, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, and my brother-in-law, and they just fired off questions at me. We played 20 questions. And to this day, my wife doesn't like it because after she asked me 20 questions, she said, well, what do you want to know about me? And I said, I don't need to know anything. I know everything I know by the questions you asked. You're looking for somebody who's stable. You want a family man. You want this, and I went through it. And she did not like that at all. But that being said, we will celebrate 35 years of marriage next month.
That's fantastic. And I won't ask you 20 questions, but we'll get a few more questions going, which I guess draws us nicely into the question of how do you get started with this book, The Six Pillars of Leadership? And why 6 pillars? Why not 5? Why not 7?
Great question. So it started when I started thinking, so tomorrow I turn 65. And traditionally, that's the magic number to retire, but I don't want to retire. And so I started thinking, what could I do to give back once I stop working full time? And I thought, you know what? I love mentoring people so much. Why don't I go and start teaching people on a bigger scale about my leadership philosophy, which has been very successful for me. So as an example, in corporate America, the average voluntary attrition rate ranges between 10 and 15% or higher. My attrition rate historically is under 5%. And it's attributed to the pillars that we're going to talk about. But what I did is 2 years ago, when I decided I needed to have a book to have some credibility to start speaking, I went through all of the people I had mentored over the last 20 some years and listed all of the characteristics or traits that I thought they were missing at the time, and to find the most common ones. And the most common ones turned out to be the 6 that are in the book that we'll touch on and talk about. But I tried to get it to 5. The 7th one was not, to me, was important, but not as important as the other 6 were. So it was a little give and take, but it's a question that nobody has really asked me, but that's how I got there. The list was actually 15 that I came up, characteristics I came up with. But the reality was, I said, if I'm going to give a book to somebody and want them to implement it to make them better, giving them 15 things is a little bit much to ask of them. And if you hone in on these 6, though, you will be a significantly different, you'll have a significantly different identity as a leader, and you'll be the type of leader that employees will want to follow and who other leaders will want to follow. And as evidence of that, anybody who's worked for me during my career, I am usually their first phone call when they decide that it's time for a new job, either to help counsel them on what they should do, or the first question is, do you have any openings? And to me, that's a testament to the fact that this framework actually works.
So if we talk about the 6 pillars, perhaps you can share with the audience what those 6 pillars are. I don't know if there's a particular ordering of it and whether these cover the chapters of the book, but maybe you can talk us through what the 6 pillars of leadership are.
I'll tell you the number 1 pillar, which I say is non-negotiable, is integrity. Because without integrity, you'll never get a team that will follow you. If they can't believe that what you're telling them is consistently the truth and clear and open, you'll never have a following. So integrity is number 1. I'll tell you a side story of how that changed my life. In 1983, the year I graduated college, I ran for a local public office as a city councilman, and I won. So youngest person ever in the town I grew up in to win a city council position. So nobody, I was 22 at the time. Shortly after the election, the city manager asked me to come visit with him. And I sat down with him, we were chatting, and he said, I want you to do me a favor. And I'm thinking, I didn't even get sworn in yet, and somebody's asking for a political favor? What is this? Is this how it's going to be? But that wasn't it at all. And he said, I want you every night when you put your head on the pillow and before you close your eyes, I want you to ask yourself one question. And that question is, did I do anything today for my own self-benefit that was at the expense of another individual, group of individuals, or organization? And he went on to say, if you say yes to that question, before you can rest and peacefully, you have to do 2 things. Figure out how to unwind it and figure out how to never repeat it. That has stuck with me my entire life. And that has been the guiding line that I kind of go down from a leadership perspective and don't vary from it. That's how important it is. And I think that is the biggest differentiator in my career, is that people see that day in and day out, in work or outside of work. It's that important.
And there are other pillars in the book: focus, compassion, stability, empathy, humor is something that you talk about. How did you sequence the book, and how do the different pillars sort of intertwine and relate to one another?
So it was difficult to order them, but so what I felt was important was, after integrity was compassion and empathy. And those are important because I think as a leader, it's my responsibility to be able to tell Sean that when you walk in the room in the morning or into the office, is your chin hanging lower today? Are you smiling like you do every day? Are you carrying your coffee cup the same way? What's different today? And then interceding and trying to help. And the story, I tell a story in the book about a time when I had to downsize a department of 25 people. It was back in the early 2000 timeframe. I worked for Ross Perot. It was a technology company. and we were sunsetting this claim system for insurance carriers. It was old green screen technology. Remember those days?
Yeah.
And so we had introduced Windows-based technology, and we'd gotten to the point where we said, okay, it's time to sunset the old stuff. We need to convert these people over to the new stuff. So we had 36 clients to support. And my job was to tell these people they were losing their jobs, but I had to prevent them from running out the door on day one. And I did not know what to tell them. And so I wrestled with it for a long time. And I finally went to them and I said I gave them 3 promises. Promise number 1 was, you will have as much notice as feasibly possible. We know it takes 8 to 12 months to implement the new products, which means at minimum, you'll have 8 months of time to search for a new job. But I didn't stop there. The second promise I made to them was that anyone who wanted to learn the new technologies, I would provide the training for that for them during the workday, not after work, not at lunch, not before work, so that when the time came, they could migrate over to the other department that was now supporting the new products. Then I made a third promise. I said, if you decide that you don't want to go to the new products and you don't want to stay with the company, I will personally help you find a job on the outside of the organization. And I will point you in the direction of a job that you're fitted for, but also will give you the financial comfort and security that you have here in that environment. So 2 things happened. The first thing that happened is nobody quit before it was their time to leave. No one. Most of the people stayed with the company. So I accomplished the goal that we had enough people to service the customers throughout this process, which took 3.5 years. But midway in that 3 years, I got a call from HR. Never liked calls from HR. And they came to my office. There was no empty box in hand. And they sat down, and my boss wasn't with them, so I knew I wasn't getting fired. And they said, we want to talk to you. And I said, okay. And they said, well, we want to, and they said, you recall about a month and a half ago, we did an employee satisfaction survey? And I said, yes. Well, we want to talk to you about your team in California that you're downsizing. And I took a deep breath and I went, how bad is it? And they said, well, that's what we don't understand. We have 20-some thousand employees in our company, and that group is the happiest employees in the whole organization. Why? And I sat back and I said, I don't know. And they said, well, what are you doing to keep these people motivated and not leaving and rushing out the door, and for them to be so happy and they're losing their job? And so I told them, I said, I made them 3 promises and this is what I did. And they were like, we got to write this down. And I said, well, why? And they said, we need to ensure that when we downsize departments, we follow that model. And they followed that model from that point forward. But that's the power that empathy and compassion has in your relationship with your employees. These people, there's 2 people from that group that still every year send me a boss's note via email about me still being the best boss they ever had.
It's a wonderful story, and the fact that those people voted for you with such high regard is a great testament to your leadership. When we talk about empathy and compassion, and we then move on to other pillars like humour and focus, humour and focus are a little bit different. So maybe you can tell us a short story on either focus or humour, and maybe some extracts from the book.
So in terms of humor, I want to be very, very clear. I'm not talking about being a stand-up comedian at the water cooler at 10 a.m. every morning. It's using humor as a strategic tool So for example, whenever I start a meeting, I'll start something off with something humorous. Usually it's self-deprecating humor because we live in a society today that is hypersensitive. I can't certainly pick at the person who has pink hair. I can't pick on the person who's, wearing an ugly t-shirt that day. Everybody is so sensitive. You really have to find things that you can laugh at about yourself, because it does two things. One, it relaxes the room, but it humanizes you as a leader with them. If they know that you have flaws and can make mistakes, they'll feel more comfortable and have more, what I call a feeling of psychological safety, which is critical in today's world. And so humor to me is a strategic tool used to diffuse tense situations, refocus people back to the subject matter if it's a meeting or a group session you're having, or just a way to get to know people better. That's it. Is not running around telling jokes. In terms of focus, I think of a story about Jeff Bezos in the early days of Amazon. In the early days of Amazon, before they had massive warehouses in every city in the world, they operated out of a small office, and they were being blasted by their customers for having terrible customer service. And Jeff went to the guy or gal, I don't know the person's name, who was in charge of customer service, and said, "We have a problem and we have to fix it." And the individual said, "What do we do?" He said, "You're not going to do anything. I'm moving my desk into the customer service department." And Jeff Bezos because he knew that he had invested all this money, that if he didn't fix customer service early in that career or that in the life of that company, they'd never survive. I mean, they were definitely a differentiator. They were different, but if they were going to beat the mom and pop stores, the malls, and everybody else, and his grandiose plans, he had to have good customer service. He took his desk, he put it there, and he went to that desk every day for 6 months. And all he did is observed. Then he put a plan together. Then he met with the head of the customer service department and says, "This is what we're going to do. You're going to implement this plan." And they implemented that plan. And if it wasn't for that individual change in customer service, they would not be the massive giant that they are today. That's focus.
They're very large. Amazon, there's warehouses everywhere, and with AWS, they're running most of the popular websites that we all consume on a daily basis. Finishing off on focus then and stability, if you ask Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, which character trait they value the most, they for success, they talk about focus. And then of course the sixth pillar that we haven't talked about is stability. So perhaps we can talk about focus and then stability.
So in terms of focus, I think it's important for everyone in the organization to understand what the direction of the company is, what the goal of the organization is, and how they're going to get there. And following that plan and not diverting. And like empathy and compassion, focus and stability sort of go hand in hand. Stability is showing up the same day, every day, the same way. Even if I'm having a bad day, my employees should not know I'm having a bad day. My approach to dealing with you, Sean, should be no different than my approach dealing with Mike or Kathy who sit next to you. And so as a leader, they need to know that if there's a catastrophe, I'm going to perform the same way. So I'm not the leader that when the garbage can's on fire, jumps on top of the desks and tells everybody to run for the nearest exit. That's just going to create panic. I'm the person who's going to quietly say, "Okay, Sean, we've got a little issue over here. We need to exit the floor." And that's what they expect in stability. Always showing up the same way every day. And also, to me, leadership is not an 8 to 5 thing. To me, leadership is 24/7, because you never know when you're going to need to show leadership, whether it's in your home or whether it's at the grocery store or wherever it is. And it's important to know that, to me, on a daily basis, leadership starts when your feet hit the floor in the morning, getting out of bed. And it doesn't end until you ask yourself that question at the end of the night about what you did that day, and did you do anything for your own personal benefit? And that, to me, is the span of time that stability and focus all have to be in play, because you do have to stay, you have to maintain that stability.
And you see it with football managers and coaches, some that are shouting on the byline, and others who are very calm and collected because they don't want to distract the players. How do you self-regulate? Are there tips and tricks around how you can keep those emotions in check? Because if you're panicked, if you're overly emotional, that can both be a positive and a negative to the team. Sometimes if the football manager is jumping up and down, it does have a positive effect, but it can equally have a negative effect. But if you're trying to stay steady and stable, what are your tips for keeping your emotions in check?
It's sometimes it's hard to learn, because I remember my first job as a manager, I was horrible. The other reason I wrote the book was we have a bad habit of, when we have an opening, we pick the best technical resource we can find and we promote them to manager, but nobody gives them a roadmap of what to do and how to treat people and what are the important things. And I didn't have that when I had my first management job. And I had an employee come into my office one day, literally raising their voice loudly. I had to close the door, but I found myself escalating my own voice. And that wasn't the right thing to do. And to me, when I think about where I am today, and I think about the 6 pillars, I wish somebody gave me that book so I would know what to do and how to handle those situations, but it didn't exist. And somebody asked me about my first management job on a podcast, and I had to think about it. And that story of that screaming person came right back in my memory. And I realized I probably owe that entire team an apology, because I have learned so much in my professional career that I was terrible. And which is why I demyth this theory that leaders are born that way. They're not. They're developed. There may be some genetic idea that all these leaders have a certain trait or whatever. That may be true, but it's certainly, I don't think, your entire being or DNA. I'll give you an example. My history, my dad was a carpenter and a factory worker. His dad was a mason. My great-grandfather was a chicken farmer. There's no C-suite in any of those. How did I get there? I got there because it was a deliberate pathway that I decided to take, that I decided to master and continue to get better. So if you're a leader out there, your learning never stops. It evolves as we all evolve as humans, and it's going to continue to change. And the way people led in the 60s and 70s and 80s, which was more authoritarian, doesn't work today. It's more collaborative today. And, it's not, Sean, I want these 3 things today by 5 o'clock. It's, we're all working towards a goal, and you have your things and your areas that you're responsible for, and there's nobody telling you exactly how to get that done. You're working through that with your team and figuring it out. And so as that changes, and even as AI changes our world, we have to evolve with that. And AI can't replace a leader. AI can help a leader, but AI can't show sympathy. AI can't show compassion. All of it may be able to tell you a joke. If you type it in, can you tell me a joke I can tell my team today? It'll give you that, but it's not going to replace the leadership as we know it.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think leadership is a lifelong journey of learning for sure. And it can be quite often lonely. So having resources and not just a support network of people, but also books and resources that you can pick up and take away knowledge is a useful thing. So if people are interested in the 6 pillars of leadership and they want to read the book, I'm guessing they go to Amazon. Perhaps you can also share your blog address as well, Jim, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Amazon is the best place because the book is available worldwide. It's available on Kindle. We have an audiobook out, and it's also available in paperback and hardcover. So Amazon is the best source for that. I do have a website. It's just my name squeezed together, jimcarlough.com. And Carlough is Carlough. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. But certainly reach out to me. There's information about not just my speaking, but I'm also launching coaching programs for individuals as well as corporations. We around the world have an attrition issue. It's not just a US issue. And my workshop, if you have a company and your attrition rate is greater than 10%, I have a 3-day workshop and a way to fix it. And a way for you to build leadership at scale. So feel free to reach out, chat with me. I'm certainly available and approachable. Schedule time, right? You can schedule time with me right off my website.
That's great, Jim. And I've really enjoyed listening to your story today, about your early life in New Jersey, then moving to Dallas, meeting your wife. But getting started with the 6 pillars of leadership, your way of giving back to the community and to help future leaders, I guess. So do check out Jim's website, Jim Carlough, and jimcarlough.com. And thank you for watching Sean in the Shed. It's been great talking to you, Jim, today. Really good to learn from you, and you're a real gentleman. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
In the shed.